Self-harm can be using drugs, alcohol. It can be, doing absolutely anything to our bodies.
You've understood or can certainly identify that bodybuilding or training is a form of self-harm. I want to just go straight into that and tell me exactly what you meant by that.
I have had a long list of different eating disorders in the past, obviously as well, doing bodybuilding. Once we finish being on stage, we will eat every single thing in sight whenever you come off stage. Some of them, they will eat so much that they make themselves throw up, which then, of course, that's a form of bulimia.
What was it that you realised at 33 that your mum was a narcissist?
Once you see that someone is smiling at someone else's expense of pain, then you have to really open your eyes to the fact that that person, there's something wrong with them. And my mum's response to it was, well, maybe I'll stop eating and we'll see who dies first. For me, I don't see, if you do not have empathy, if you do not have the core root of empathy, you're not human.
Is that a thing? Like, can people become addicted to trauma? So guys, today we are joined by psychology student and holistic coach, Livia. How are you doing, Livia?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. This is so lovely.
No,
thank you.
Honestly, it's no problem whatsoever. Now, obviously, I know you reached out on Instagram. You want to come on the podcast and have a chat. Something that hit me straight away was when we had a conversation on Instagram. You mentioned that how you've understood or can certainly identify that bodybuilding or training is a form of self-harm. I want to just go straight into that and tell me exactly what you meant by that.
Well, I mean, obviously, I first of all, I really want to stress that this is in no way to offend anyone. Like, I've been in the industry for 8 years. So it's something that it just came to me a while ago. I was going through so much last year myself, and because I wasn't able to train at all, couldn't move or anything like that, I wasn't able to use my usual outlets. And as I was going through everything and analysing everything, I was like, well, why did I start bodybuilding in the first place? So I took it down to the very root cause as to why I was actually bodybuilding initially. So that started to get the ball rolling. And then I brought it up in therapy, obviously, like with the injury that I sustained last year. I brought it up in therapy to try and understand certain things. And my therapist, I said to my therapist, I was like, the way I was using bodybuilding was pretty much the same way I was using, unfortunately, I ended up getting addicted to marijuana last year because of everything that was going on. And I realized that I was substituting. And it's not the fact that I see that bodybuilding is completely that method. Self-harm comes in many different forms. And I think people just completely will just hone in on that aspect that it's about self-harm. And self-harm can be using drugs, alcohol. It can be, doing absolutely anything to our bodies. So whenever it came to understanding the initial reasons as to why I started bodybuilding, I was like, oh, it's because I was miserable when I started. And then I just got carried away and I didn't want to let it go. And I'm sure that you've seen quite a few people within the industry yourself. You've seen so many athletes, not just in bodybuilding, but athletes in general. And you would definitely say that a lot of these people, their starting point came from a place of just unknowing. Like, they didn't know what else to do.
Yeah, I think personally, I mean, when I got into the gym, I mean, I'm not by any long stretch of the imagination am I a bodybuilder, but I do like the gym. I would probably say I'm a bit of a gym addict. I'm a gym rat. I'm always in the gyms. But it's, for me, I do it from a mental place as well. Like, don't get me wrong, if there's an aesthetic that can be achieved by going in there, but it's earphones in, aeroplane mode on, and it's just me in the weights, and that's why I do it. However, when I did get into it, I got into the gym through I lost quite a significant amount of weight, and I knew that going to the gym was something to kind of counteract that, and to kind of keep that up. I've never had a bad experience with the journey. I've been training for around 8 years now, pretty consistently every week. Never really missed a week, apart from holidays and stuff like that. But I mean, even then, it's kind of on my mind to do a session. I know that a lot of the guys that I have met, and girls obviously, across the gym industry or the fitness industry in general, a lot of them, what I see is a lot of them just want to achieve something. I feel like a lot of them want to be known, build a business now, and just be better in general. I don't always see it. I mean, I never had until you mentioned it, and that's what that's why I was really interested in having this conversation, or excited to have the conversation, because I never saw it as a form of self-harm. And I feel like when you've said that to me, I can understand why someone would self-harm to maybe take back control of something in their life, and I feel like the gym is the best form of doing that. Obviously with you, Livy, when you were obviously growing up, what was that like? Why did you get introduced to the gym? I know that you said that obviously you were miserable and stuff when you started, but what was can you touch on any of the trauma that you faced when you were young that led you to getting into this? What's happening, guys? I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, please hit that like, hit the subscribe button, and press the notification bell so you don't miss another episode.
Oh boy, it's a big can of worms to go down.
I'm ready to open them.
I mean, I do also have a podcast myself, Trauma Pond HQ, and that's pretty much because of the amount of trauma that I experienced as a child. I was brought up by a narcissistic mother, so that in and of itself is a really hard thing to deal with in any family. It doesn't actually matter what your role is within that family. Having a narcissistic parent, you've signed your life from the day that you're born, pretty much. So like that in and of itself was one of the things that was very traumatic growing up. On top of that, I also grew up in Northern Ireland during the tail end of the Troubles. So funny enough, I actually got diagnosed with ADHD last year. And in that meeting with the psychiatrist, I told him that I was from Northern Ireland and I grew up in that era. I was 10 when the peace process was signed. And he said, "Oh, that must have been very hard for you." And I said, "No, it was an absolute picnic." So he found that very interesting. But then whenever I said that I had a narcissistic parent, he was straight up into, "Oh, so, your safe place was actually being out in the street as opposed to being at home." And I was like, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, for the viewers or listeners who don't know what kind of a narcissistic parent looks like or what narcissism is, could you explain it, and what were the things that your parent would maybe do to let you know that it was narcissism?
So I actually only discovered, I'm 35 now, I only discovered that my mum was narcissistic when I was 33.
Right.
So it's been very, very recent. And for a lot of people, they'll never know that their parent is a narcissist, like in those specific terms. However, you will notice a lot of kids know that there's something not right with their parent once they get to school. And that was a key thing that my siblings and we all discovered when we were about 4 years old. We all said it was about 4 years old when we discovered something wasn't quite right with our mum. And for a lot of people within the home, it actually depends on your role in the family house. So narcissistic parents, if you have one, and if you're unfortunate enough to have two, because that can happen as well. I only had a narcissistic mother, and of course, dependent on the role as well, is also going to determine as to how you're going to grow up and how you're going to evolve as well. Because you don't have the nurture that you're supposed to get from a mother, you end up having severe attachment issues going up in life. So I have severe rejection attachment style. I constantly think that there's something that I'm going to get rejected for all the time. So getting into bodybuilding, They say that you have to be very thick-skinned to go into bodybuilding.
Yeah, but when you said
And I
there
feel
about
like-
you realise at 33, because I think that's absolutely crazy, the fact that it took all those years. But I can understand I'm 33 myself now, and I can kind of understand those things that maybe would happen when I was a kid that I actually reflect on now and think, actually, was that right, or was I overreactive there, or was that necessarily the right thing to do? What was it that you realised at 33 that your mum was a narcissist? So I think it's really important. I know, like, and the reason I want to really get into that is because I feel like without that kind of detail, as detailed as you would like to go, I really want to give the viewers and listeners like something to bite on, to be like, okay, because maybe there's similar traits with their parenthood or even their own parenting style if they've got kids, like, and I feel like that could definitely help people.
Yeah, this is. I was very fortunate with how I came to the realization. It was actually, there was a horrible thing that happened between my mum and my sister. And I can't really go into the details of that because it's not my story to share. And I've already been exiled by the family. So it would be very wrong of me to say exactly what happened. But without going into too much detail, my sister got very, very sick. And narcissistic people don't like it whenever there's attention on other people. It always has to be on them. And what happened with my sister was she got very sick. She told my mum and dad what was happening with her and the help that she was getting because of her sickness. And my mum's response to it was, well, maybe I'll stop eating and we'll see who dies first.
Right, okay. Okay, so
and like that was pretty stereotypical. Like that is not what it was that made me realize that. I actually told the story to a friend, and she is a counselor, and she was the one that actually said that sounds narcissistic. And I just remember when she said that sounds narcissistic, I'd never exercised the idea of my mom ever being a narcissist.
Yeah, of course, I understand.
But when she said that, it was crushing. And I just remember stopping in my tracks. Like, we were on a walk and I stopped walking because my entire life we were actually hoping that my mum was bipolar.
Right, okay.
Because at least with bipolar, you have got medications that you can take.
Yeah.
But narcissism, there is no cure.
Right, I see. And it's funny because, and I would just ask the question, with yourself and kind of what you've learned and how you always, now you kind of have this pit of, you fear rejection and things like that. Could you argue it, or could I argue and say, is that a form of narcissism in itself?
A fear of rejection?
Yeah, because if it's all about, like, I feel like I'm going to get rejected or I'm going to get you get what I'm saying? It's all. Could that be, is that worth saying, or is that not something? I just thought I'd maybe pick at that as well, because I feel like for me,
No.
if someone's, constantly fearing that the worst would happen to them or the rejection, for me, I would look at it and say, well, maybe that could be a form of that, or is that completely wrong?
Well, generally that will fall into the subject of abandonment issues.
Yeah.
More specifically, it would head towards borderline personality disorder. Thankfully, I don't have that one. But narcissism, to its very core, is zero empathy.
Right, okay.
That's it. And that's why, I say it an awful lot on my show, and I'll never get sick of saying it. Because for me, I don't see, if you do not have empathy, if you do not have the core root of empathy, you're not human.
Yeah, I understand.
And I know it's very, very aggressive to say such a thing, but narcissistic people, and I've said this quite a few times as well, narcissistic people will only ever treat you as a toy or a tool. You are nothing else. Absolutely nothing. And one of my successful videos that I have, I broke down the Kardashian family because, they're full of narcissists in that family. I said in that, and one thing that got an awful lot of response was something that I said, that narcissistic parents don't actually love their children. They love what their children can bring for them. There's a difference.
So with the Kardashians as an example, what is it that you saw in the Kardashians as a family, whether you saw them on TV, Instagram, social media, or who they are as people? What is it that you can identify with the Kardashians that you believe that they're narcissistic?
It's not all of them. I did break down the family clan because there are, like I said, there are specific roles within a narcissistic family. And so obviously Chris has been able to make a career from the way that she is. So she like there's different types of narcissism as well. So Chris, she was able to pioneer an entire empire with using her children. I identify most with Courtney and Rob, who are the scapegoats in the family. And Rob has had it worse than any of the other kids because he's a boy. And narcissists will generally hone in on one specific thing that makes you the weakling of the pack. And for me, in my family, because I had dyslexia in school and obviously undiagnosed ADHD, but that's something that can actually get worse over time. I was just seen as an absolute disgrace because I couldn't read and I couldn't write. So my learning abilities were absolutely shameful, pretty much, to my mum.
So I think the argument there would be, if you were to look at, say, Chris, making money off the family and stuff like that, is it not their children's choice to pursue these things, though? Do you know what I mean? Like, because there's got to be that angle as well. I understand that the parents may benefit, like, a narcissistic parent may see their kids as toys or kind of gems that you just go out and we'll just take all the benefits. But at the same time, if those kids are actually choosing to fulfill something that they want to pursue, is that necessarily a bad thing?
There's a difference between letting them find their own path and pushing them down that path.
So are you saying that their parents of the Kardashians would have been pushed into the kind of ways that they went or the avenues that they went down?
Well, I mean, Courtney is definitely saying that she's the one that she doesn't care. She doesn't care about fame. She never really wanted it in the first place. So, she's ended up being just, a victim of circumstance more than anything else. But then, of course, you look at someone like Kim, and Kim just thrives in it. And I actually have said in that episode, Kim is worse than her mom because she smiles when she gets a ruse out of people, especially the scapegoats, which is terrifying. Once you can see that a person is smiling Once you see that someone is smiling at someone else's expense of pain, then you have to really open your eyes to the fact that person, there's something wrong with them. And I do go out on a limb and I say that she is a malignant narcissist. Calling people narcissistic is not diagnosing them. Narcissism is a personality style. If anyone was to say narcissistic personality disorder, that's diagnosing someone. So
what do you think, if someone's listening or watching this right now, Livy, and they've got parents who they may think that there's something to do with narcissism in there, that they can't quite point the finger on it, but at the same time they've identified certain traits, and what can they do to kind of address that? Because surely by definition, how do you help a narcissist? Because they're not gonna believe that they are one ultimately.
Honestly, it's kind of a doom and gloom scenario, unfortunately. For one, you can't ever say to a narcissist that they're narcissistic. You can never say it.
Mm-hmm. What's normally the reaction if you were to do that?
It's not good. I didn't know when I first started understanding narcissism, because like I said, I had a major injury last year and my head was completely out of it most of the time last year because of this injury. My mum was calling, checking in, because I was not in a good way. Still not 100%, but she said she was trying to get me to do more yoga, to try and do certain things. And I said, I'm doing that. I'm trying to get my body back. And she goes, yeah, but you're doing the wrong kind of yoga. And I had just had enough at this stage. I kind of snapped and said, I am done with your narcissistic like points of view. I'm just done with it. And she said, she lashed out and said, I didn't want to have you anyway.
Bloody hell.
So I like it's not even the first time that she said that. She said it many, many times before. You know, like, I'm the mistake and everything. It's kind of funny whenever she does try to put me down, because when she does, it doesn't make sense.
Would you say that's your reason
only
for
for the
moving
fact that
away
I'm a
as
logical
well?
person.
Is that your reason for moving away? Obviously, I know you're from Northern Ireland, but you live in Australia now, don't you? I know for the listeners, the viewers, it's about 2:30 in the morning over where you are, isn't it? So you were definitely game for this
I think
one.
it's 3:00 now.
Yeah, is that the reason why you moved away, to get away from that?
Actually, no, it's not. It's not. My trauma gets worse. I actually met an Australian on holiday. We were on a Mediterranean cruise. He then became my husband, and I moved out here because of him. But after 3 years, we were divorced. But he's also the reason why I got into bodybuilding.
Right. Okay. Was he a bodybuilder as well?
Living. Pardon?
Was he a bodybuilder?
No. Like I say, I got into it for not all honest reasons. I actually said to my partner the other day, I said, if honesty was the only option to show our true intentions, no one would ever speak.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful one, isn't it?
I realized I'm doing 75 hard again for the third time, and I'm reading quite hardcore books at the moment. I've had to take a break from this book several times to read other books, but it's the 48 Laws of Power, and in it, I think it said, never use your friends to get a job done, but use your enemies instead.
If you don't know by now, I run a business called The Content PT. I create content for influencers, PTs, online coaches and fitness brands all around the world. So if you are someone who's in need for sexy content for your social media, or you really want to maintain a competitive edge in your industry, drop me a DM on Instagram. Yeah, I understand that. I think with, when you mentioned about people who, if they spoke honestly, no one would ever speak, if that was the only way to speak, I actually believe if everybody was purely honest, you would create a good shit sieve around you, and then there'd be only good people left. Because I feel like you'd filter out very quickly what you didn't like, because you'd understand what they don't like. And sometimes it's as much as people don't like, the truth or someone else's version of the truth, or they get slighted very easily, or whatever it may be. I feel like regardless if someone projects their true feelings on you, at least you know if they don't like you. And I feel like a lot of good can come from that as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I feel as though, like I said, whenever I got into bodybuilding, I was lying to myself about the reasons why I got into bodybuilding. I was telling people that this is something that I always wanted to do. I was telling people that I was fully inspired by the people in my gym, but it wasn't actually the truth. The actual truth was, and it took me only actually until last year for me to realize the actual reasons why I got into bodybuilding. And I've only been able to speak about it this year because it's very hard to admit your own truths. The reason why I got into bodybuilding initially is because my marriage was on the rocks. My ex-husband fell out of love with me, and you can feel it when someone falls out of love with you, but he fell out of love with me like about 8 weeks after we got married. And I decided to be the best wife I could possibly be. I worked hard. I made sure that he had the best life. I wanted to make sure that all the small things that he really enjoyed, he was getting, because he did FLIFO, which is, you fly out to site for about 2-3 weeks at a time.
Right, okay.
So every time he was home, I was making sure that he had the fresh sheets, he had beer in the fridge, I'd make him beautiful meals every night. And I did all of this at the sacrifice of myself, because when he wasn't around, I wasn't looking after myself. I was primarily focused on trying to make sure I was a good wife, but it wasn't working. And after about a year and a half, I gave up and I decided, you know what, I'm going to start doing bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm. And did you find that, when you were doing those things for him, did you necessarily want to do those things, or do you feel like you were doing it for him?
Oh, that's a good one.
Because I think that's a I've got a friend of mine who actually, similar scenario, and they basically split up, and they split up over a cup of tea. And I know this sounds crazy, but they actually split over a cup of tea. And, the best way to put it was, he ultimately said he didn't want to make other cup of tea anymore. And he was like, I just didn't want to. Because, it's like, can you go make us a cup of tea? Yeah, I'll go make you a cup of coffee. He was doing it, resenting it. He's like, I don't even want to make this person a cup of tea anymore. And that was like, shit, like, that's pretty powerful stuff, because then you start realizing, actually, when you do something, whether it's a gesture, whatever it is for your other half or significant other, friend, no matter what it is, I think it's really important to take a step back and say, actually, when I'm doing this task, do I actually want to do this task? And it kind of goes back into what you were saying about people who speak truth, because ultimately, you shouldn't have to do things if you don't want to do them, regardless. Why live a life trying to please somebody else? I really believe that you both need to be pleasing yourselves first and then have that energy. I feel like when you're trying to please somebody else, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. It comes across that way. They understand it's half-hearted. And I feel like that. So when you were doing that, were you doing that for the sake of him, or were you doing that, to save your marriage, or were you actually wanting to do those things?
Do you know, it's so interesting, because all I'm thinking of is the whole red pill idea. Mm-hmm. That, I am actually a very traditional woman. If I'm being honest, there's nothing about me that is feminist at all. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm a very strong-headed person. Yeah. I do have a lot of opinions and things like that. At the end of the day, I do want to be taken care of, and I do want a man to look after me, and I need to respond in kind. That's just the way that I feel it is. It could be potentially the fact the way I was brought up, acts of service are my love language. Yeah. And if anything, I don't actually believe even that. I think, I'm full of different acts of showing affection. But I would definitely say I definitely do want to be that person. I wanted to be a good wife, and I wanted to potentially be a good mother one day. Yeah. But whenever it goes completely,
we just run out of time.
When that person just takes full advantage and takes it for granted, and then puts you down about certain things of your life that you can't control. Yeah. It makes you feel horrible. And, I'm in a relationship now, which is so unbelievably healthy. I never thought I'd get into a healthy relationship. I was like, I'm screwed. This is it. I'm just going to accept what I can get.
I bet he's in the room with you now, just waiting for you to come out with something. No.
We actually live separately.
Do you really?
Yeah. He lives I've got my own little flat here. He lives in his house, but we're both very hardworking people. We've only just started our own business journeys this year. Right. So he has started his business. I'm starting all of my things. I've started the podcast. I started PTing this year as well, and I started doing psychology as well last year. So we're very ambitious, and the idea is, I've said this, I think I've said this to him, or else maybe I've just said it to myself, but the idea is that it would be nice for us to be very financially stable, get our own place that's big enough so that he's at one end of the house and I'm at the other, and then whenever we want to be together, we can be together in that space.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well. I mean, I just feel like kind of everything that you've said then and everything you've kind of been through growing up and, you know, is part of your journey. But what I'd be really keen to know is now, do you have a really sensitive radar for potential traumas in other people as well? So for instance, when you are looking for a partner, like are you constantly aware, like, actually I can identify there's something that you're saying here could necessarily mean this? Or I don't necessarily even mean narcissism, Livy. I mean just in general, like, do you have a particularly good understanding of what to look for?
Oh, I do. I feel other people's pain.
So if you look at sort of the modern dating world, if you see now, for example, what do you think of the state of it right now? What do you think that more men should be doing, and what do you think more women should be doing, and what things can people look out for to spot in each other that could potentially be a red flag?
This is a very complex question. In all honesty, I think the idea is that I've gone around a lot of people at university actually over the last couple of days for research, and I've asked this specific question to both men and women. And I've said, what do you think is the problem in society today that is making us clash heads so much? And I've said it before on my podcast, but all I'm seeing is that between women and men having specific traumas, neither one will respect the other, even if it has been the exact same trauma. So I say to people, the best way I can really describe it is, say someone is being a victim of domestic violence. Now, men and women both experience this. Neither one will get treated the same way by society. Yeah, okay. So a woman will get blamed for whatever it is that happens within the home, or a man, whenever a man experiences domestic violence, he has to be quiet because he'll be shamed. Yeah. That's a thing, isn't it? So I actually do feel everybody else's trauma. Like if I see, and this is a horrible thing to say, and you might want to cut this out because it could actually be very hurtful. Even though I don't believe in offending. I don't believe in offending, by the way, because people choose to be offended. It's a choice. That's an interesting one. It's true. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to say? I'm excited to see what you're going to say now. When I see a person who is overweight, I know what has caused them to be that way. Can you say that though? Can you put your hand on your heart and say that, like, you can actually... Is that your way, or do you think that's a way that... Do you think that's been a little bit judgmental? Obviously, I've got my thoughts on that. And what... Okay, so can you give us an example? So, again, this is also another thing that comes down to bodybuilding as well. You can even put anorexic people into this category too. And yeah, I know what I'm saying is very, very harsh. But our relationships are everywhere, including a relationship with food. So when we have got horrific things that happen to us in our lives, we will rely on something else to bypass the feeling of what we're actually experiencing in life. So a lot of people will either start binge eating or they won't eat at all. Yeah. And because that's the relationship that they know that they can trust. So ultimately what you're saying is, like, when someone's faced some kind of trauma in their life, they'll turn to a particular vice, whether that is overeating, undereating, going to the gym, trying to regain some kind of control in their life. Is that what you mean? Completely. Everything to do with dealing with trauma will come down to finding a method of control. But there is a massive difference between coping and dealing. So when people end up going, oh, I'm just going to eat this entire pizza because, you know, it makes me feel good. It makes you feel good in the moment, but how do you feel afterwards?
But what about the people who just, because I'm gonna admit I'm one of them. I am team eat the whole pizza. Like, I'm not having one or two slices. Like, I am, that is me. But I'm also happy to not eat the pizza when, you know what I mean? So I feel like I would argue and say I think genetics would play a role in that as well, because I feel like to a degree, I know when people get, you know, morbidly obese and stuff, genetics don't just make you that way, but there may be things that play a role in why you would do that. And I feel like that isn't always caused by trauma. I feel like there's got to be other reasons why you'd maybe eat. Or would you just say it's literally, it all boils down to something that you're trying to deal with?
For a lot of people, it can be that. Like, I'm not tarnishing everyone with the same brush. I'm not. The thing is, like, you can turn around and say, I will eat the whole pizza. I'm a person who will eat an entire pizza as well. My partner, actually, he makes jokes about the fact that I can eat food very, very quickly. Like, we will have the same amount of food, and mine will be long gone before his is gone. And I have had a long list of different eating disorders in the past. Obviously, as well, doing bodybuilding, we do end up going through a transition of, once we finish being on stage, we will eat every single thing in sight whenever you come off stage. It's like, right, I've worked all of that time. I've done 9 months prep. Now I'm about to go and just hone in on all of the burgers, all of the shakes, all of the chocolate bars, everything that I couldn't touch for months on end, and then scoffing it down. But then an awful lot of people, for a lot of people who I know in the industry, and I've spoken about this in great detail with a lot of my friends that are in the industry. Some of them, they will eat so much that they make themselves throw up, which then, of course, that's a form of bulimia. For myself, I thought I was the only one that did this, but then, of course, thankfully, doing my own research, a lot of people will end up taking laxatives, and in big forms, because you're eating so much.
Is that what you were doing?
And you don't want to lose the body. Yeah. After my second prep. So my second prep, my third prep, I had done really, really well. I went to Vegas. I came third in Vegas. But then whenever I came back, COVID hit. And couldn't go to the gym, couldn't go out anywhere. And I was just wanting to scoff down all of the food that I never got the chance to for almost a year. And I was going balls to the walls.
It's crazy for me, because I've worked with quite a lot of bodybuilders who've been through prep and competed and stuff like that. A lot of them are clients to this day of mine. And it's funny, because I feel like there's still got to be a level of self-control, because it's weird, because with bodybuilders, right, they've got the determination and mindset to go all the way through a prep to the button and not miss it, not eat a single peanut out of plan. However, when it comes to post-show, a lot of them will binge. It may develop, you know, bad relationships with food and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's almost like you've got the mindset to not do it for that long. How do you lose control when you can do it? And I feel like that's the thing that needs to kind of be harnessed a little bit better. But I feel like it's one of those things where, you know, if you deprive yourself of anything, you're going to go crazy and want it. And I feel like that is just, food's just another thing. I mean, there could be anything. There's people out there who are addicted to all different types of stuff. You keep yourself away from it, and it's all you want when you're allowed to have it. It's a bit like letting the dog out the gates, or the bull with the red rag. And I feel like that's the thing with food. It definitely can be, you know, something that can come to the aid of those in need. And I feel like as long as you can teach control, like, it's easier said, 100%, but I feel like counselling should be did a lot more with people who have with food and stuff like that, especially with bodybuilders. I actually believe that 100%. When you mention, obviously, trauma, and this is why, again, I wanted to talk to you about this, because for me, you're a psychology student. You are literally the perfect person to speak to, because you're fingers on the pulse. You're in it day to day. You're in and around people. You're making studies and this, that, and the other, and you're doing your own method of research. What is trauma?
So trauma is... It comes in many forms. So trauma is a very specific event that will happen to an individual or group that will have a resonating effect that lasts for quite some time. So it's not the same as tripping over and falling, because that is also, you can have physical trauma as well. So if you fell and tripped, you would get a surge throughout your central nervous system that is like, oh, I just tripped. I've got pins and needles, all of that sort of thing. Whenever it comes to certain types of trauma, it can actually live within our bodies. So they actually say your mind will actually bypass a memory of trauma, but your body will remember it more than your mind will.
Right, okay.
So for a lot of us...
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it can be it can be an event that's happened to you, which you may forget, but you're living on with, type of thing. So it could be something, something horrific happens to you as a child. Your brain would automatically try and block that out to try and protect you, but ultimately you will, have these outbursts. You may develop a personality disorder. All these little things that may come out of your character is something related to that thing, that trauma, but you actually didn't know until you kind of, get mature enough or old enough to understand what it was.
And that's only if you are old enough and become aware of yourself. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing as well. A lot of people, for them to be able to bypass a traumatic event, they have to become aware of what that is actually doing to them. So as an example, PTSD, that is not just something that is specific to soldiers that have served in war. You can have PTSD from absolutely anything. It can be visually seeing an accident. It can be you being in an accident. It can be an incident where there's a loud bang and something bad happens to someone. If you're a highly empathetic person, if you see something that's going to resonate with you. If you hear or see something that is anywhere near similar to the event that has triggered that trauma, you will relive it. You will be taken back to the exact point, and your body will start to actually react in that way. I've also been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's CPTSD. And for that, you actually have to experience one or many significant issues in your life, but like traumas in your life before the age of 18. Because in that time, your central nervous system has now grown into that environment. Mm-hmm. So you'll notice that anyone who is exceptionally jumpy has had some sort of traumatic experiences in childhood.
Right, okay. Is there any is there any famous examples? Because again, it's something where there's going to be a lot of people who tune in who, they've never experienced trauma, and I feel like, you said that was a great example of someone who's jumpy. There's a good chance that they probably have experienced trauma. Is there any big examples or cases that you can kind of touch on and say this is a good example of trauma at its finest, really?
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Unfortunately, if you are a person who is alive and breathing, you have experienced trauma at some point in your life. There's no such thing as a person that never has. But it can do one of two things to you. It can make you an exceptionally cautious person of doing certain things. So say anyone who has a fear of something, it's because there's been a traumatic event linked with that. So I think it was in my last episode, I was talking about people who have certain food phobias.
Yeah.
And generally, it's something that happened to them before the age of 6 years old. So in my personal experience, I despise custard. I hate it with a passion, to the point where it makes me want to throw up. And it's because when I was 4 years old, I was bullied quite badly in school as well. The kids at school pushed my face into custard, and from then on, I could never touch it ever again. Now, I thought that was just an odd thing that I had developed and then discovered many years down the track. But it turns out that that's actually a regular thing.
Well, here's one for you. I've never had strawberries. I've never eaten strawberries. I'll never go anywhere near them. I don't know if it's a fear, a phobia, or what. I've saw the hairs on them. I'll not touch them. But that's actually in my older years. And to this day, I'm 33-year-old. I've never ate red sweets, berries, anything to do with red foods like that. Like, I've had like tomatoes. That's the closest to a red fruit, if you like, and beans. But other than that, like, I've never ever tried them. I've never tried like even like Haribo sweets. I've never tried anything like that ever in my life. Never touched them ever. And I feel like I'm just at the age where I just don't want them. So I don't even. And like, I've had people around who say, but you should try them. But for me, I'm like, but why? That's not going to strengthen me character. Like, I don't want to try them. That's like, if you don't want to go on a roller coaster, you should go on one. Well, what is that at this point? Like, do you think people who are scared of roller coasters, do you think that's related to trauma? Or do you think, because where's the line, like, between like what you actually don't like and actually there's probably been a traumatic event or something in my life which has led to me not wanting to involve myself with that particular thing?
Yeah, some people are just completely cautious. Like, if you have a fear of roller coasters, I mean, sometimes, I mean, I love roller coasters, but I don't know why, because when I was very, very young, my parents and we went to Blackpool, and on the Big Dipper that's in Blackpool, it got stuck at the very, very top, and all we could do was just like stand and watch as people were like panicking to try and get off this ride. I think I was probably like 4 years old, and I was like, I still want to do it.
Yeah. See, because that's what's interesting.
Some people just have caution.
Yeah, well, you look at guys like stuntmen and people who've like nearly died in car accidents and stuff, and the first thing they do is want to drive fast. What's that all about then? Like, what do you make of that? Someone who's been through trauma but will automatically put themselves in those scenarios.
That could be a personality disorder.
Do you think that's what it is? Something like that?
It could very likely be. People who have a low threshold of fear of death or anything like that, generally you'll find that there's potential. I'm not saying that it's definite, but there is potential that they could have antisocial personality traits. Which a lot of people that are not aware of this. Antisocial personality disorder is an umbrella term for psychopathy or sociopathy.
I would love to see the study of psychopathy and people who use roller coasters.
So there's a fantastic doctor called Dr. Kevin Dutton. I love his work. He's got some fantastic books, and one of my favorite books that he has co-written with a psychopath, actually, Andy McNabb. It's called The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success. Fantastic book, because the whole book is pretty much them having a conversation and sharing his findings and things like that. But people who have antisocial personality disorder, they tend to have a very low ability of their own risk. So they don't care as to whether or not they could potentially live or die.
Right,
they really don't. They don't care about societal norms. They don't care about other people. They're the ultimate rogue people.
So for me, I would look at that particular study there, or certainly from that book, what you've learned and what you've told me there, that I bet you there's a very high suicide rate, or pioneer entrepreneur rate as well, because ultimately if you're happy to be ruthless, you're not really, you're a bit of a sociopath or a narcissist, or you're any of those things which would, really limit your empathy towards others, I feel like those are the people who you'll see often succeed. So yeah, I'd be really interested in seeing that. Is bodybuilding a form of trauma, or is bodybuilding a form of self-harm?
So I'm not going to say it is for everyone. Some people want to do it as a goal. And, like I said, I've done quite a few seasons now. And whenever I speak with the federation owners, they all say the same thing. 90% of people that compete will only ever do it once. Yeah. So, and then of course you have the 10% that they treat it like an absolute career. Like you had your IFBB Pro champion.
Yes, Marnie.
Mariah? Marnie, that's it, Marnie. Yeah. Fantastic, like what she's been able to achieve. But when I was listening to her story, and it was like, yeah, she was in a stuck point and didn't know what to do, and then she found her passion, and that's fantastic. But it started with being miserable.
Yeah. Like, so do you think the bodybuilding is a way of dealing with that?
Everything has got a method of coping, but like I said, you have a method of coping, and then you have a way of dealing with it. Dealing with it is actually addressing it, understanding what has happened, actually analyzing your reasons for wanting to do things. I say that bodybuilding is, there's a difference between being a wine expert and an alcoholic. And it's the same thing.
Of course. See, it's, it was on a podcast with Chris Williamson, actually, who's been on the show. And he actually, I can't remember the guest, but at the time, but they mentioned about like kind of sex workers and stuff as well. And a lot of sex workers the reason that they're sex workers is because they'd probably been through some kind of trauma, abuse, or something like that as when they were young. So the reason they've become sex workers is because they want to try and minimise that trauma, so they take control. And I mean, what have you got to say about that as well? Do you think that people automatically put themselves into traumatic situations, or purposely give themselves things to deal with like that to try and minimise how negative it could be on their life?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm a victim of that as well. So, yeah, I had a few things happen in life. Yeah, my first ever sexual experience was assault. And that was my life for 2 years whenever I first went to college. So I never got to consent to anything. It was all through assault. And then, of course, I ended up becoming an absolute deviant. Now, to say that was one way for me to take control. For a lot of other people, they'll do it through other means. And of course, when that happened to me as well, I ended up piling it on. Like, I had a severe addiction to food at that time as well. So I ended up getting up to a size 16, close to a size 18. After my sexual assault, and that would, there's a whole lot to unpack with that one. But then, of course, becoming so sexually deviant as well is something that can happen to an awful lot of survivors. But they have actually done studies on this, that women can become more addicted to porn than men can.
Right, okay.
Because that is their method of taking back control.
Right, I see what you mean. I feel like, do you think it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, like, to deal with that? Like, if you've been through, I mean, do you feel like every individual, like, is that the route to be a deviant? Is the route to kind of, to abstain from that type of thing? Or is it a case of you've literally got to go through something to understand it yourself? Because it's very hard for someone who hasn't been through, because I know you said if you're living and breathing, there's a good chance that you've been through trauma in some way, shape or form, which I appreciate. But I feel that a lot of people are unaware, and in order to be aware, they've got to go through something which can then relate to a trauma that they've had. So like, for me, it could be something as trivial as I don't like strawberries. But for all I know, something may happen down the line. I know we're laughing, but where actually that's why, bang, it's because of that. But I haven't experienced that yet. So how does someone deal with something? I know you said like living with, dealing with, how does someone actually deal with any level of trauma? Like, I know that there is levels to this. I want to ask two things. I want to ask, what are the levels to trauma? And I want to ask, what is the best way to deal with, trauma in general? Is there anything that you could really advise someone, like dealing with something? It could be hard at home, an experience that they've had, whatever it may be. Like, what is the first thing that somebody needs to do?
Well, first of all, for your thing with strawberries and red things, I actually reckon it's so far back in your past that you could have been like 1, 2, or 3 years old that something happened. It could be. I'm not saying that, but it could have been. You never know. But when it comes to a trauma, the thing is, an awful lot of people really struggle with this, but it's self-awareness. It's understanding that something is really harming you. I didn't actually realize that I was suffering from a drug addiction last year until about 3 or 4 months ago. I didn't know. I knew I was actually taking marijuana every single day, and sometimes like several times through that day to try and deal with the trauma of my injury. Because each trauma will trigger a new coping response. But it was when I actually realized that, wait, I'm doing this every day. I didn't actually realize that it was an addiction. But it was when I started actually realizing I really need to get myself better. I can't deal with the fact that, I'm relying on something that isn't helping me get better. I need to fix myself. And I actually asked myself a question, because like I said, I'm in a relationship with someone who is just the most amazing person, and I'm so lucky and so grateful to have such an amazing person in my life.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where I was actually saying, this, like, even though I know that we're never going to get married, we have made that conclusion. We made that conclusion a long time ago. Even though I know that we're not ever going to get married, why would anyone even want to marry me whenever I'm in this state? And it really made me think, if I can't be alone with myself right now, sober, then what is the problem with me?
Yeah, was there something underlining though? Because I know you said obviously being addicted to marijuana and stuff, and I don't condone that in any way, shape or form. It's not something I do, but like, what's so bad? You're smoking marijuana on a daily basis. What did you feel like you needed to deal with? Like, because is that necessarily a bad thing? Like, I'm not a marijuana smoker, so I don't know, but like, if I met a lady and she was smoking marijuana, it wouldn't make me think any less of that person. So like, obviously I'm in a great relationship. I've got a little daughter, but if me fiance was smoking marijuana, I wouldn't be like, right, you're a bad person, I couldn't live with you. Like, it's each to their own, because then I wouldn't want to be judged for doing a podcast. I wouldn't want to be judged for, like, I don't know, like, was there something deeper than just smoking marijuana that you were trying to deal with?
It was because I was becoming reliant.
Right, okay.
So I couldn't function in my day without it. I mean, the whole reason for it was like, at the beginning of last year, I lost the ability to walk. Like, I had full body paralysis, kidney failure, and of course now I have seizures, all from medicine. But I couldn't deal with the fact that, like, I was suffering from severe tremors as a part of this mandatory medicine that we're not allowed to talk about. And the tremors were so bad, like I couldn't function. I couldn't even talk. And I'm still struggling today to be able to communicate things properly. Like I'm getting an awful lot better. Like I say, I'm 80% better. But whenever you become reliant on a substance, or you become reliant on your coping mechanism, that's whenever you have an issue. Like we can say that there's an awful lot of people, like I at the gym, there are people that will be at the gym for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, and they're not doing it for a sport. So what are they doing it for? If you're willing to spend 5 hours in the gym, why are you not looking to face being alone? You have to be alone in your head for your entire life. Your brain it's you and your brain. You have to get up with you every single day. You have to go to sleep with you every single night. If you're not in a relationship, it's always going to be you. Even if you are in a relationship and you have to go away for work or something, it's still only you. And if you can't cope to be with yourself sober, or, not using your coping mechanism, you have to really ask yourself the question, why can I not be alone with myself?
Does it need to be justified though, Livy? Like, when you said someone who's in the gym 3-4 hours, like they've got to be somewhere, right? That day, like they've got to be somewhere for 3 or 4 hours. Like, why not it be the gym? Like, can you not do things just because, like, there's something nation, like he's in the gym for 3 hours, he's dealing with something. Because I know he finished his weight an hour ago, so what's he doing in here? Like, can't it just be like, because then you would ask the question, if I love to go walking and I want to go for walking for 2 hours a day, I'm assuming someone would say, he walks 2 hours every day. Like, what's he dealing with? Like, why can't we just be? Like, does there have to be an explanation, or, like, do we like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like in today's age, like, I understand, like, podcasts are the things, and research, and why we do things, and everyone's fascinated by it. That's why I've got a podcast. That's why I've got you on to have these conversations. But ultimately, like, I would hate someone to think, Ads has been on the podcast for like 4 hours, today. Like, this a bit, like, is he dealing with, like, because I bet you could put a study on me and be like, well, hang on a minute. He's working 10 hours a day. He's doing podcasts. He barely gets a lot of sleep. He does this, that, and the other. He's up and down the country. Like, maybe he's trying to battle something. Or what I would say, because I'm living in my head, that I absolutely love doing what I do. And that's my balance. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like...
yeah.
Because what I wanted to ask you, Liv, was, do you think people can become addicted to trauma? And the reason I ask you this, right, is because I know a lot of people who are unhappy with the lives that they're in, whether it's a 9-to-5 job, a relationship, no matter what it is, and there's a lot of people who are just genuinely unhappy, but they do nothing about it. And I feel like there is always a way to get out of these scenarios, regardless of how hard it may be. If the position you're in is harder, like, until it's that hard, you won't do anything about it. But you see people who will complain and will, they're in these situations. But I feel like you can become addicted, surely, to this fucking hate me life. Like, is that a thing? Like, can people become addicted to trauma?
I think people become addicted, I wouldn't say people would become addicted to trauma. I think they become addicted to their coping, because dealing with the trauma is so much worse. It is, I would definitely say, out of everything that I've ever dealt with in life, the hardest thing that I've ever had to do was go to therapy. Like, that's the hardest thing. I experienced my kidneys starting to shut down last year. That was the most excruciating pain I've ever had in my life. And I would still choose that over starting therapy. It's very, very hard to actually start to unpack all of the things that you've had to deal with. That's why they say everything, all of our emotions, we put them in a box, we lock the key, and we put it to the back of our brain so we don't have to deal with it. And that's usually the response that an awful lot of people will get to. But it's not the trauma that they're addicted to, it's the coping that they become addicted to because it's keeping that box locked.
So, final question, Livy, just to kind of wrap this one up. I just want to ask you, obviously you're a psychology student, your finger's on the pulse, you're in it in 2023. What would you say is the most useful piece of research that you've did or learned?
Oh, the useful, I mean, like it's not so much useful, it's just more that I'm terrified of what's coming. The thing with psychologists is that we can actually, you actually can predict the future given people's social skills and all that sort of thing. And in all honesty, I'm truly terrified of what's coming because everything that's happened, especially over the last few years, I'm genuinely terrified of what's coming in the next 20 years when these children who have come about over the last 3 years, I'm genuinely terrified of what's coming because, like I said, their development through a really stressful time of what we experienced, these children were born with underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes and deformed amygdalas. And deformed amygdalas are a part of the brain that is in response to emotion. And the thing that you see most commonly in psychopaths and borderline personality disorder are people with deformed amygdalas. And it's truly terrifying what is potentially going to come with all of these children now. And to say that it's going to be an easy ride over the next few years in psychology, I could safely say it's going to get a lot worse for a lot of people and for a lot of people's health as well. I mean, more specifically, I want to study health psychology, and the things that I've learned from doing health psychology has absolutely blown my mind. Another thing was that I have suffered IBS most of my life. I've been hospitalized quite a lot with IBS. And to learn that IBS is actually primarily a psychological condition was the biggest insult to me whenever I found that out. Even more so whenever I found out that all of my symptoms could have been combated by seeing a psychologist and not a GP or
you need to read the GAPS diet.
Doctor.
You know about the GAPS diet? If you read about the GAPS diet, that kind of lets you know how the mind's all connected to the gut, and it's phenomenal. Because I've actually got IBS myself as well, so I understand that. Yeah. So I did quite a bit of reading and stuff in and around that as well, and that was it's mental, all that type of stuff. It's literally mental. But yeah, I feel like everything you said about kind of, the time everybody went through recently and stuff like that, and how babies are being born with X, Y, and Z, and they've got those kind of similarities that have sociopaths and psychopaths and stuff like that. I just hope that that's not the case. And the reason I say that, there was a funny thing that I read, and it was like, what have all psychopaths and serial killers got in common? They all drank water. So I just thought that was funny. So I just thought hopefully there'll be no real link in 20 years' time that for over the last few years when babies were born.
I live in hope. I do love the fact that, we're in a different age now where, technology is really helping us all. And there are people that whenever they do have children, they want to have their children have the best life. Some of them learn from their parents' mistakes that they don't want their children to experience the exact same things that they had. So the beautiful thing is that we do have so much information. There's so many things out there these days that, we can look to so that we can prevent all of these things. In saying that, having a deformed amygdala does not necessarily mean that you will be a psychopath. It doesn't mean that. It just means that there is a higher likelihood that you could potentially be. But whenever a parent is nurturing and caring and loving, and you're there for your child, then there's no issue with that. They're going to grow and develop into a beautiful person. It's only if they feel any sense of abandonment or neglect, that's whenever we have to worry about them, and that's so much more common than you would think.
Livy, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. Honestly, it's been a class chat, and I wish it could be. And I've said this to a few of my guests because I literally only let the people who I want to speak to on, because I want to put out the best stories. And again, obviously I've seen your work, I've seen what you're about. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming on, and I'm sure I'll have you on again in the future.
Oh, I would absolutely love that. This has been so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And congratulations on your podcast. You've done an amazing show, and I think that how you do things is just brilliant. You're a fantastic interviewer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's appreciated. Cheers.